Welcome to the Todd County Board of Commissioners Drainage Authority for Todd County Ditch 41. Tonight's agenda will conclude the outlet hearing. Today is September 14th, 2021. The time is 6 o'clock. All commissioners are present along with our ditch attorney, auditor, treasurer, and coordinator. We will stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will ask for a motion for the approval of the agenda as presented.
So moved.
By Commissioner Kircher. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kneisel. Discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And carries. And Kurt?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. As the board knows, we had a second public hearing, and at that time we continued it until tonight. As Commissioner Erickson rightly said, we've received a lot of it, or you received a lot of information and needed some time to kind of think through it, and as did I, to try and procedurally decide where we were. At that time, at the last hearing, you closed the public input portion of the hearing to come back to the board to decide where you're going to go with this or what motions may or may be made, and I'll go into that in a minute. Since that time, although we closed the public hearing, we have received 4 written items, and I've talked to Mr. Shockley. We could argue about whether they should be allowed in or not allowed in, but the 4 items I'm recommending, you'll give them whatever weight you want. They kind of restate things that they're not new information. So my recommendation is that, and I think Mr. Shockley will not, I think he's not going to object, that the 4 items would be an SWCD response to LID answers to SWCD questions, a email, I believe it was, from Jerry Brever regarding Old Creek Loop, again, which was discussed at least the last hearing, maybe the one before that. 913, a memo from Houston Engineering regarding Mr. Brever's email, and then on 914, received a LID response to SWD's 4 recommendations. And again, it's your decision, but I don't think it's worth arguing about. It's a lot of the stuff that's already in the record, a lot of the documents. So I would recommend that we allow those 4 documents to be made part of the record.
Do we need to do that as a motion? Or
No, I
we
think
just
I can
consent?
just indicate that, and unless the board objects, we'll simply make those items part of the record. So if I don't hear any objection, they will become part of the record.
Okay.
So. Then as the board discussed, and as you see under item 4 on the agenda, we're to the point where it's back to the board, and I'm trying to, there's a lot of moving parts in this, and I'm trying to keep it as structured as possible so that it makes sense both to you and to the people involved. So the way I'm thinking that the board may want to proceed on this, you basically, as I indicated, have 3 options: to approve the outlet, to approve the outlet with conditions, or to deny the outlet. If there was an interest, A and C don't take a lot of action. B, if there was an interest in discussing an outlet with conditions, I think the most structured way to do that would be for somebody to make a motion to approve it with conditions, if we get a second, and then during the discussion, go through conditions that you would want to be part of that, and then we'll see if it passes once we get to the point of having all those conditions discussed. Otherwise, I think if we start just kind of talking, I don't think we'll be very structured. You also received, since the last meeting, a proposed order that Mr. Shockley put together and that I reviewed, and he talked to me about this, so this didn't come out of the blue. You always want to have a template to go through rather than starting with the yellow pad and just start writing notes. So it gives us something to start with should you decide to go that direction, and then we can start going through it. I will say the public portion is closed, so you have every authority to ask Mr. Shockley a question, me, Bill Helgett and Mike Opat are on the, so if some issue comes up during your discussion that you would like an answer to, you're free to do that. But members of the public, nor me, will just volunteer things to respond to things. It's if you direct and you would like an answer on something. So, do you have any questions of me? I'm trying to structure it as best I can so that the board gets to a point of discussion. Maybe one more thing I should talk about, because Chris brought this up, and I think it's a good point, is that it's somewhat of a two-step process under 401. You don't get to the outlet fee. Now, if you don't get to the outlet fee until you decide whether you're going to grant the outlet. If you deny the outlet, then it's a moot point. If you decide to grant the outlet with conditions, and you thought you had a basis tonight to set an outlet fee, we certainly could do that. The statute does not have a formula. I wish it did. It does not have a formula. It says 1, 2, 3, this is how you decide an outlet fee. So if you granted the outlet, you could come up with your own outlet fee, or it's possible to say, all right, we've granted the outlet with conditions, now we're going to get a recommendation from a viewer as to, because it is, there's been some history that Mr. Shockley may talk about on other projects, how, I don't know how they came up with their numbers, but anyway, my point being, I don't think right now we should get hung up on the outlet fee issue, because that's somewhat of a it's like a franchise or a use. This property did not pay for the ditch originally, so they're paying something now to use the ditch. But I've done outlet cases all over the state, and sometimes it's for a 20 acres piece of, they can range all over the place as to how they're computed. And with that, I think I'll stop. And if you have questions of me procedurally, or if this doesn't make any sense, or.
Okay.
I do, Madam Chair,
Commissioner.
and I think the question was asked at the last meeting, Kurt, whether the outlet fee could be an annual fee, and I wasn't sure of the answer on that.
I think it could be a condition that generally outlet fees are one-time fee, but this is more like a use fee. I think it's possible you could make a condition that it's something annually. Yes, I think you could.
Kurt, I guess I have a question too before we go into this any further. Some of the papers I read, it's a long use, it is a permanent easement. Can we not set time frames on this? I mean, I would hate to go into the future indefinitely. Can we, set a working time to see how it's working? Can we set an end time to see when it's complete?
Yes, I think you could say this is a 5, 10 year, or whatever year you decided to do. I mean, there's kind of a catch-22. If they get an outlet and they spend all this money, they want to be able to use it enough to justify spending all this money. So yes, it's possible, or you could have a review after 5 years to see if it's working the way the engineers thought or something.
Because the first information we received, it was from 3 to 4 years.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, it's a permanent, it's a long-term. I think we have to have an end date, because I'm not in favor of anything
I
without
think
an
the
end
3 or 4
date.
years was to get it back down to ordinary high water mark. And then if at the 4th year, if you happen to have a huge rain and it got 6 inches above ordinary high water mark, and they could pump when it was appropriate under the conditions.
Or they could bring it back to the ditch authority at that time saying, this is what's happened, can we continue to pump? And redo it with probably a new ditch authority sitting up here.
I'm hesitant on that. I understand what you're saying. I'm hesitant that we would have a whole new board making a whole different decision.
But I mean, they should have the right to, after it being used, if there's never been a problem or not a problem, I couldn't imagine them not agreeing to do it. But if there was a problem, they have to have a time to say, okay, we have got a problem here, how are we going to fix it?
Yeah.
One way or the other, you know.
Or you could, I'm trying to think how we can do it so there's some type of review, but not a, all right, you're done after they've spent this kind of, I'm not their proponent, but it seems to me you certainly could say, when you get it down to ordinary high water mark, kind of like an acceptance hearing in ditch law, that when it's down to water mark, we come back to this board and see how it's working. And if anything needs to be slightly tweaked in some operation plan, but it's your decision, but
Okay.
an outlet under the statute isn't contemplated that it's a 3-year outlet, it's an outlet, under the very strict conditions of their operation plan. We'll talk,
Okay.
you know, you'll make the decision and we'll deal with it, whatever you decide, so. But what I'd like to get the discussion going, assuming you have any interest, I mean, if the vote is we're denying and then we leave, but if there's an interest in a thorough discussion of conditions, I'd like to get it a little more structured where somebody makes the motion to, doesn't mean it's passed yet or anything, but it gets you into a discussion of what conditions you'd like on it, so.
Well, Madam Chair, I don't think we can open discussion without proper Robert Rules of Order, and that's to have a motion and a second.
I believe you're correct.
Commissioners?
Well, Madam Chair, I'll make a motion. And if I'm out of line, please correct me. I'll make a motion to approve the order with conditions and move for discussion that with the majority of agreement on board members, that conditions be implemented and enforced. And I do have a number of bullet points that I would like to bring forward for conditions, but I'll wait for a second, Madam Chair.
Okay, the motion was made for approval with conditions by Commissioner Kircher. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Commissioner Erickson.
Correct.
Discussion?
Madam Chair, my points of stipulation are that all permits be acquired before the order is activated, and that Morrison County money be used according to their resolution, and that the coordinator and engineer and ditch inspector costs be instituted in this motion, that their costs are covered whenever they are doing something with this project. And my other one is that the laterals be involved in that we conduct any or use any expenses if laterals are what should I say? Affected, thank you, by any of this order and petition, and that there be a 3-year review, and that review would be by the coordinator, the ditch inspector, and the engineer. And the reason I say that is because board makeup could change, but I think that those 3 department heads will probably be pretty consistent. I also want to include that the outlet fee, and I know our attorney says we shouldn't discuss the outlet fee, but my point is that we have an outlet fee of $30,000, and that this be an annual fee. That's all the bullet points I have at this point, Madam Chair.
Commissioners? Further discussion?
If I could
Okay,
jump
sure.
in, if we look at page 3 of the proposed order, because I want to add those bullet points. I want to make sure we've discussed all the bullet points before you decide. So if you're looking at page 3, it starts with A there. If you don't mind me going through these to see if you're in agreement with these, and then we'll also talk about Commissioner Kirchner's that I wrote down here. So the first one is, the lid operating plan attached as Exhibit B is approved, subject only to any changes or requirements imposed by Department of Natural Resources. And that, again, that's so they can go to the DNR, but later it says that if they make changes, they gotta come back here. So B, the lid will strictly follow the lid operating plan whenever it operates the lid project. Again, they risk losing any permits if they don't do that. C, the lid operating plan must be reviewed and approved by the Department of Natural Resources prior to the lid commencing construction of the lid project. Again, I think that's, they have to do that.
I could stop you for a
Sure,
second, Kurt.
sure.
Where are you reading this off of? I think we're paging up here trying to find the papers. Can someone help
Okay.
us in our
I
book?
hope I'm reading the right one. It's on the order, it's the third page of the proposed order that was sent to you. And it's on the, I can read it off the board.
No, that's fine.
You've seen this, haven't you? I hope, okay.
Yep, and Kurt, Madam Chair, if I may say that, I
Yep.
don't think that was specifically printed for this, and I apologize.
Oh,
I'll
no,
get-
that's fine.
Okay.
We can go off the board. So again, A was that the operating plan, Exhibit B, is approved, subject only to the changes requirements. B will strictly follow the lid operating plan whenever it operates the lid. And again, we had a thorough discussion last meeting that if they don't, they risk everything if they don't follow the plan. C, the lid operating plan must be reviewed and approved by DNR prior to the lid commencing construction of the lid project. D, after reviews and approvals by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources contemplated in condition C above, any future substantive changes or amendments to the lid operating plan must be approved by both the Drainage Authority and the DNR to change or amend it. And again, I think, you know, if there's been a comma missing, that's not a substantive change. But if there's, you know, when they can operate it or those type of things, they'd have to come back and get your okay in it. And I think the lid understands and agrees with that. E, the lid will utilize electronic alert technology and/or their website to provide the data and information to Todd County as required by the operating plan. That's the part, maybe Mike or Bill, I don't understand the and/or their website. I mean, I don't think anybody's trying to sneak anything through. I just don't understand what that means. So maybe John or maybe Mike can explain what that means.
Yeah.
If that's all right, Madam Chair.
Yes.
If somebody,
Yeah, we had
Yeah,
also questioning the or of it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, members of the Drainage Authority, Madam Chair. The reason I used and/or was that with electronic technology changing, it could, you know, websites over time, we thought this order would be in place a long time. And so over time, you might have different electronic alert technology. It wasn't meant as we're gonna do one or the other, it was trying to cover our basis. So you could use both, you could use one depending upon technology. I think our thought was that we would just work with the ditch authority staff and figure out what that final alert technology would look like, just because it's really hard to codify specifics like that. You know, when should it be on the website, what technology? It could be a totally different technology in 2 or 3 years when the project is built.
okay, so basically it's to get as quickly and as technology-oriented information as possible instead of always having to wait for somebody to go out and take a reading. I guess that's the way I read it. It was that we don't have to wait for somebody to go out and look at it, and we'll know immediately if, based on technology. Am I following that right?
Correct, and we
Is that
really
what
didn't.
you're thinking, Commissioner Newman? That's what I'm thinking. We want people involved as little as possible. We want technology to tell us when it should be operating, what triggers are going, all those type of things.
Right.
I guess part of it was, you know, websites, you know, we just don't want to be left out of the loop,
Right.
put it that way. And with the and/or, that's what our concerns were.
And to further respond to that, in the operating plan, we're required to give Todd County notice already. This was sort of like a belt and suspenders that on top of what's already in the operating plan. This was just to provide information, and we didn't, you know, the project hasn't been finalized in design and the technology hasn't been implemented. And so with some flexibility, do you post it on the website? Is there like an app that you could use? I mean, there's all sorts of different electronic technologies that could be utilized. At this point, we really didn't have a, definitive answer on what that technology should look like, just that we would utilize it.
I'm comfortable. I think what they're trying to do here is just say, we'll use the best technology we can use so that you get as quick an answer as possible. I don't think they're trying to say electronic or some website that we'd have to go look at. They coordinate together. Does that answer your question?
I'm looking at Chris, she's our IT person, if I could.
Yep, so Madam Chair, I guess just to kind of clarify the concern with the or, sometimes web pages or websites are just static. So how would the board or anybody else who's looking at the site know that it's up to date to the time of whatever alert technology is used? How would we know how often it's updated? And that's the concern with the or.
Mike, Mike Opat, I'm not 100% familiar with the technology that would be employed and how that would update to the website. I was really just trying to give some flexibility here, but Mike, I don't know if you could just briefly talk about it, if you're on.
Yes, I am on. Can you hear me there?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can.
All right, thanks, and good evening, everybody. So from a technology standpoint, I think in the 2 weeks here since the last hearing, we've done some investigation on that. There are many options out there, and so depending on what the requirement is from the Drainage Authority as far as remote monitoring and reporting, there are various ways that can be addressed. So there are systems that could be installed that would monitor those areas on a continuous basis, and those results could be reported out to a list of individuals that would be identified and kept in constant contact with that system. Or if a less involved system were to be utilized, for example, relying on what was in the current version of the operating plan with the LID monitoring with their resources and reporting, then you could upload that information to a website, and the public in Todd County and all interested parties could have access to it that way, in addition to having it emailed out every time it's updated. So I guess, again, to summarize, there's a broad range there, and regardless of the system that's required and ultimately implemented, up-to-date information can be provided to Todd County on an immediate basis.
So maybe I could suggest we add this wording. The LID will utilize electronic alert technology and/or their website approved by the Drainage Authority staff or consulting engineer. That way Bill and Mike can work together and and so that Nancy feels comfortable, or Chris or whatever. And Mike might prefer that too, to make sure it's something that we feel comfortable with. So I would suggest we add that language that it says what it says, but we add approved by the Drainage Authority staff and/or consulting engineer. That way there's some cooperation in how we're going to alert things. So, is that, I don't need a motion, I'm seeing shaking of heads, does that make sense? Okay. The next one, the LID must secure and maintain general liability insurance in the minimum amount of $1 million per occurrence for any damage caused to Todd County 41 by the operation of the LID project. The LID will provide the Drainage Authority with a copy of the general liability insurance policy prior to commencing construction of the LID project. This is one of the issues that came up last time. I think it's a very good condition. I was asked about this versus a performance bond. If this was our project or we doing an improvement and it's your project, then you want a performance bond that it gets done. We want liability insurance, whether their contractor does what he's supposed to do, that he'll have to post a bond to them, I assume. So this, I think this is a good paragraph and gives some comfort to the people on 41 that even though all the engineers say this is gonna happen, if something different happens, there's insurance coverage for it. So. All right, and again, I'll just keep going until I'm interrupted. The LID project will be operated by the LID. Again, we're not gonna be operating the project, it's not our, anyway. H, the LID will take appropriate action to levy an annual charge sufficient to provide funds for the maintenance, operation, insurance requirements, and management of the LID project. And then I think Commissioner Kirschner, one of his conditions, and maybe we could either add another one or, if I'm following you, we don't want people on 41 incurring assessments for this project.
That's correct.
So we want some type of language that if Nancy is specifically not doing repairs on 41, but specifically on the LID project,
Right.
that those costs would be covered.
That was my intent.
That's, okay. And I think we can put language in that will cover that, Commissioner, and protect the people on the 41 system. And then, before we go on to number 5, back up to, and I agree completely with, again, it's kind of a circular situation. If we give an outlet with conditions, that doesn't override other permits they may need. A condition would be, it's conditional on them acquiring all other permits from whoever it may be, so.
Excuse me,
Sure.
did it address all other permits, or did it just speak of just the DNR up there?
That was on the operating plan. I'm going to add a condition that this is conditioned on
My motion was that all
petitioners.
permits be
Yeah.
acquired.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't think it needs a core I don't even know what they all need. We just wanna make sure before they start pumping that, and so would they, that they have all permits they need, so. I will add that as a condition.
And if I could,
sure.
with that, Madam Chair, with that bullet in that, my motion, I would ask that all permits that are acquired be provided to the ditch authority, please.
Sure.
Madam Chair, as long as they're
Yes.
making notations too on that one earlier that was noted by Commissioner Kircher, I would just like to add the drainage authority to that. I know you mentioned like the coordinator, whatnot, and even if this board changes, I think they still should be a part of the review.
Okay.
So just add the drainage authority to the review time. I think it would be a-
That's the one we're gonna talk about last, the review, how we're gonna word that, to have review, but not pull the plug on the project after they put all this money into it,
They're
so.
complying, it's, you know.
The one that I understand, but I'm just thinking how I would word that, and maybe Mr. Shock. Morrison County, and our decision isn't based on Morrison County, but I'd be lying if it wasn't saying in everybody's back of their mind that that's one of the, so maybe I can ask John, have they committed that, yes, if this gets approved, they are going to send a check to Ditch 41 for $200,000?
That's not how
No.
I read the resolution.
Okay.
It's not.
Yeah, the resolution provides that the $200,000 comes when they start construction of the project.
You wanna give that to
And-
Kurt, so you can.
And the reason that I believe I don't want to speak for the county commission, but I
Right.
believe the reason was that if for some reason that you weren't able to get the other permits that you're talking about, the county may want to use it for another project to drain down the lake.
So they kind of have the same conditions. We'll give the 200,000 as long as your project's a go and.
Right.
Okay.
Which seemed like a reasonable.
Their stipulation was that it go through their county engineer, if I'm right, if I read that right, am I correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kirchard actually talks about where the funds come from, and it comes from the Public Works Reserve
Public
Fund.
Works,
Yep.
okay.
But it,
I haven't.
Just read the resolve.
It says, now therefore be it resolved, the Morrison County Board of Commissioners, for the purpose of supporting the Lake Shamana Lake Improvement District, maintaining the general economic welfare of the county, ensuring safe and long-lasting public infrastructure, including the county road system, and assisting with alleviating the flooding on Scandia Valley Township infrastructure and for citizens in the area, will contribute $200,000 from the Morrison County Public Works Reserve Fund to the maintenance of Todd County 41 to offset costs incurred upon the award of construction contract for the Lake Shamana High Water Project. So if,
Does it not stay in there someplace or long-term? Because I was questioning what does long-term mean. Did I read it?
Well, I don't know about long-term, but it's specific in the dollar amount and how
Yeah.
it's to
Right,
be. And that was my concern, and that's why I added it to my condition that we follow their resolution
that
and how it is.
conditioned on Morrison
conditioned,
County
yes.
following their resolution?
Yes,
I think that, you know, we can't order them to do anything,
No.
but it's conditioned on
it just follows their
Morrison
resolution.
County following their resolution. I guess that's all I can say, so.
That was my intent.
Okay. I think that makes sense, so. Hope you're making good notes here, somebody. I'm making notes as fast as I can too, but, then, the next one, laterals affected. I lost you on that one, so I just
Well,
wanna make
There
sure.
is, there has been testimony as far as the laterals and some have more concern than others, but I think we should be concerned if a lateral is affected by any of this project, that the cost not be incurred by us, but by the lid. So that was my intent there, so.
Madam Chair, I believe during the talk on it, it was versed as significant impact. So define that.
Yeah,
That's why I said affected by.
I think that's why, I think that's why you're including them, is it not? I mean, that's what we got.
It's-
was
that's
it wa- It
argumentative,
was not
so-
supposedly supposed to cause any significant impact to the laterals.
Yeah.
and both engineers agreed with that, so
Right.
you want a condition that if that isn't true, that somehow it comes back to your board to discuss, to review?
Well,
Is there
whatever.
any way we can put a checkpoint? So we can monitor if there's,
If I could.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. If
If
it's
I
all right,
could-
I don't know. Go ahead.
I think your check is the operating plan, because if we're not complying with the operating plan, then the permit, we lose our permit. The question I would have is, what is significant impact? I mean, our project, if there's somebody, or if a beaver constructs a dam in the lateral, that's clearly not
Right.
the fault of the project.
Right.
I think if we're operating outside of the operating plan and it has an impact, I'm just thinking that if you could tie it somehow to the operating plan as a definition for significant impact, if it's,
The wording tied to that. I think that's fair, as far as what I'm buying into on it, but
Everybody's
I mean,
telling
they-
you,
they- they-
everybody's telling you something's gonna happen to the lateral. You wanna make sure that if
Absolutely.
it doesn't
it's
happen,
projected to do such a thing.
Right,
We
right.
wanna make sure it does that.
And trying to.
I think
avoid-
we can come up with wording that covers that issue, so.
significant impact could be 4 inches to someone, and it could be 1 inch
Right.
if you're trying to bale hay.
Yeah. And again,
Or half
as
inch.
Mr. Shockley said, if the water's coming from above, has nothing to do with this and hits a beaver dam, that's different than backing up because of a pump running way upstream someplace. All right, we'll come up with some language on that. Then, the 3-year, I wanna have a discussion on how do we have some type of review, but again, I'm not their proponent, but that a different board 3 years from now, once they, pulls the plug on this whole thing and says you no longer have any outlet anymore. I'd rather have some type of review to make sure it's working the way they want, and if we have to tweak something, fine, but it's not subject to a full-blown outlet hearing again.
Madam Chair, my intent on that was to have a 3-year review by the coordinator, ditch inspector, and engineer, and compile a report to be made to the ditch authority.
Perfect. I think that's very reasonable. And, because they won't, if it's not working anything like they say, they're gonna be in violation of their permit. So there's lots of people that wanna make sure it works the way it's supposed to work, so, all right. The outlet fee, do we wanna talk about that tonight? I mean, I think they'd like to get it wrapped up if, as long as something they can live with, cause otherwise we'd have to continue it for, and I wish I could give you a formula. It's X amount per mile or per gallon, but there's nothing in the statute that says that, so. And I don't have a, well,
Well,
I don't know.
The reason I made my, I know Kurt, you had made a suggestion of 20,000, you just popped that in there, I think,
No, I think that was the lid.
or somebody did, I don't know who did,
I
but,
think the lid did, but that,
okay, the lid did.
you had to start with some number
Whoever
there.
did it.
Yeah.
My suggestion was, after giving it more thought, that 30,000 annually, and maybe we could put a sunset on that if we wanted to, after a 3-year review, if everything is going according to plan, so. That could be a suggestion on my part, so.
Well, I guess from the lids standpoint, the one challenge with that is because of the way the operating plan is, you could have 1 year in which you only pump for 30 days. And so it doesn't seem like just having a flat fee every single year has like a connection to what's actually going on in the operating plan. You know, the lid is already taking the risk that you might have really wet spring and they can't pump, and then you might have a wet summer and they can't pump, and then they might be able to pump from August 1st to September 1st. And so the 30,000 seems kind of disproportionate to what they would getting out of it. I think there's probably a formula that we
Yeah,
could
I was
think
thinking maybe
about.
we could divide, following up on that, maybe any month they pump, it's 4,000, pick a number that kind of ends up, if they, because I think they're hoping they can do 9 months, if I recall the testimony. If everything was perfect, am I right on that? I think if, you know, if they have situation 9 months, you could say it's 3,000 a month or 3,500 a month, whether they do 1 day or 30 days in that month. It gives them a little, if they have a whole year that they don't pump anything, they don't have to pay an outlet fee that year. So, I don't know,
Well,
Pay by the hour. Well, that's what you pump, when you
Right.
pump irrigation, it's
yeah,
by the hour.
I don't wanna get this too complicated.
The more hours you pump, the
so,
more you gotta pay.
Yeah,
And if you don't pump at all, you don't pay. I don't know how you figure how much an hour, but
yeah.
you're pumping a lot of gallons an hour, so.
you almost have to have an hour meter on there,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
I
I would
don't wanna
imagine-
get too I'd rather set a dollar amount per year, the more I think of it, instead of arguing, whether it's 25,000, 30,000 a year, they can decide if they wanna live with that or not, so. And then, like you say, to be reviewed after 3 years. After 3 years, the board may say, all right, you've paid an outlet fee of $90,000, we feel that's sufficient,
Well, and maybe after the 3-year review, the coordinator, ditch inspector, and engineer could come back with a recommendation of reducing the annual fee or eliminating it.
And I would like to see it come in front of the
Yeah, that would
the
be
ditch
tough.
authority.
Well, it would come
to
back
go-
as a recommendation, yeah.
For everyone to see what's be brought up to date.
I mean, that's.
The other option is we could decide everything tonight and get a recommendation from a viewer.
Okay.
I-
I've got another question that's
We'll
kind
come
of
back to
concerning.
the outlet fee then in a second.
Okay. My other question is, took a drive around Lake Shamana. I was amazed, I hadn't been out there for many years. The buildings out there are unbelievable. The lands that I used to know as wetlands are now parking lots and boat lots. So what can we do to curtail the building that should be wetlands on this project? I mean, I can see it going on forever if they continue to let buildings and continue to close down the wetlands. So do we have any
No,
bite
you
in
have
that
no
whatsoever?
jurisdiction
In
to do
Morrison
that.
County.
No. You don't have
I
any,
mean,
you don't
it's-
have any zoning, in deference, I'm saying this,
Yeah,
you don't have any jurisdiction to set their zoning or the state for that matter. The state has shoreland setbacks and all that type of thing, so you just don't have the authority to do that. But again, that's not the only lake where people that have been around a while, I can all 10,000 lakes have things that
Yeah.
people that were here 50 years ago say, how'd they ever build on that spot? So they've had some of that, but they also had testimony of cabins there a long, long time having water problems. So. Anyway, to answer your question, we don't have, as Drainage Authority for Ditch 41, we don't have the jurisdiction to tell them where they
Okay.
can build and not build.
Another question I have is spring and winter pumping. We do not know what the snowfall will bring into winter or spring conditions. So if we allow them to pump during the winter, how much of a flooding issue are we going to have in the spring when we don't know what the spring brings?
Well, that's part of the operating plan, as I understand, that they'll have to address all those issues, so.
Yeah, and maybe Mike Opat from Houston can briefly address that, but keep in mind that as soon as you shut off the pump, all the water that was from the pump is out of the entire system within 12 hours. So the pumping plan is designed so that you monitor your hydraulic conditions, and I'm sure I'm getting that term wrong, but you monitor those conditions and you pump when the water is below a certain threshold. And Mike, if you could just briefly maybe answer the question about winter pumping and how that would work.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So this was something that we addressed in the most recent updates to the operating plan that was presented at the hearing on August 31st. And we had worked with Mr. Helgett and developed those updates. And I think one of the key changes there at that time was that we took out the forecasting and we addressed the operation in the winter and the spring months, and we simplified that by leaving that up to the discretion of the Drainage Authority. So the LID understands that operating in that time window will be up to the Drainage Authority, and they're kind of taking forecasting out. So we'll be looking at the actual conditions in the drain, in the ditch. If it looks like it has capacity, we will work with the Drainage Authority and their staff. And if they feel that it would be acceptable to pump water, then we can consider doing that. But if the Drainage Authority has concerns during that time window, they can tell the LID that they can't pump, and the LID will abide by that.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I have a
Yes.
question too, Kurt. When they talk about a viewer outlet fee suggestion or whatever, does that come strictly as a suggestion?
Right, you make,
Not a-
it's not in granite, you make
final
the
call.
final decision.
Okay.
And we've got a number of lake projects around the state, so a guy like Ron Rehnquist has done a number of lake projects, or maybe there's somebody else, but I think it's a good idea to get a recommendation from somebody. Then it's defensible, or, anyway. So I think the procedurally how it would happen, if it passes tonight with the conditions, we will put that into an order, but they'll know that, subject to maybe a couple little wording or commas, that they've got the outlet, and the only thing left is that we will get a viewer to make a recommendation, and we'll get together once more for that, your determination on outlet fee.
And if I could, from my perspective, I think having a viewer make a recommendation is probably more appropriate, because I think the uniqueness of, only pumping certain times a year, I could shoot from the hip and tell you what the outlet fee should be, and we could be out here all night coming up with arbitrary numbers. That seems like the best approach.
So people like Ron have been a viewer for 40 years, so he'll have whether it's right or wrong, he'll have a justification for whatever number he comes up with. You might agree with it, or you may say, no, I don't agree, but at least you'll have kind of like this, something to start with rather than just picking a number. But you have the authority tonight to set it if you want. It's up to you, so. Anyway, where we are, any other commissioners have anything else we haven't talked about in our list here?
Here, I think I had one other point, and I don't know if I saw it in the operating plan or not, but I think there should be some way, and maybe it is in there, something stating in the fact, or is there any way that the Drainage Authority or people here have a way to shut that pump down if they're unable to reach someone over there? I'm not wanting it to be a control freak type thing where you're doing it, but we all know that things happen where people aren't reachable. And I think it should be something where we would have at least one way to be able to shut that off.
Yeah, I mean, you can have some kind of emergency clause, but I assume this is gonna be a locked pump. I wouldn't think they'd let people just walk along and flip switches.
I would guess it will be electronic.
I'm
Could be.
gonna have our engineer
my-
respond.
Mike, how do you turn this thing on and off?
Turn the key.
Yeah, so at the present time, the operating plan is structured such that the lid is the operator of the system, and they're also responsible for monitoring. And they would do that either with their own staff or possibly a hired consultant that would take care of their operation, maintenance, and monitoring. So they would have the controls on shutting the pump off. Of course, it's important to recognize then that if there is an issue that puts them out of compliance with the operating plan, then they're in violation of their permitting and the conditions of the outlet petition, assuming that it's approved. So there you would get into clauses in the operating plan about rectifying the issues and notifications, and they would likely be appearing in front of your board to discuss those issues. And then I believe the draft order you're looking at then also includes liability insurance that would address any issues that would arise out of such an event in the rare chance it would happen.
Mike, just from a, excuse me, Madam Chair, but if you don't mind me, just from a practical point of view, who's turning this thing on and off and how are they doing it? Maybe you
Yeah, at
answered
the
it and I
present
didn't hear
time,
it.
go ahead.
Maybe you answered it and I didn't hear it, but just from a practical point of view, the meters are down, it's a time we can pump. Who actually, how and who turns on that pump?
Yep, so at the present time, the system is set up to flip a switch in the control room at the pump station. Again, that's located near Lake Chaminade on the southwest side. And that would be operated either by lid personnel or a hired contractor that would operate the system. And they would likely have, a schedule or an on-call system to have somebody on standby to address that. Also recognizing that, again, with the liability that's involved, if there is a storm event or, a significant chance of rain and the ditch levels are, approaching that maximum operating level, they're going to take proactive action to make sure that they can shut that pump up before they become out of compliance with the operating plan.
So Madam Chair, Kurt,
Yeah.
so is there a time frame compliance thing? So I'm getting the whole picture. I understand that they'd be out of compliance, but it doesn't really say, or I haven't heard the word saying within an hour, or within 2 hours, or within 2 days, or with
In a week.
what time frame are we calling a whatever response?
Is it in the operating plan, how long they can be out of compliance? Or is-
My understanding it isn't. Mike, do you have that available, what the timing is in the operating plan?
There are some locations in there where there's language requiring them to take action within 12 hours, which again correlates to that time frame we've been referencing as far as how long it takes the water to work its way through the system. So that has been incorporated on at least one item in the operating plan.
Maybe if I could suggest, having worked on a very similar project, could we just include some language that the ditch authority representative would contact the lid board representative and come up with, those nuts and bolts issues about, contact. I know with the other lid board that I've worked with that has a drainage project, they are in contact with the DNR, they're in contact with the county, and they hired a private contractor who follows the plan, does all the reports and everything. It gets very granular, like who's reporting when, and, without knowing, the specific person that's gonna be flipping the switch, so to speak, maybe it's just, instead of trying to solve it down to the granular level, maybe just say that the ditch authority's representative would meet with the lid board representative, go over the operations plan and the contacts and emergency.
Yeah, so Nancy and our staff feels comfortable that they can get a hold of, at all times, a hold of somebody.
I guess my concern comes in, growing up on a river and watching how fast a river changes when you get in an unexpected rain. 12 hours seems like a long time. That can change a lot in 12 hours.
Could I add a comment to that? I was just looking at the operating plan here.
If it's all right with the board, if you happen to be looking at specific language, it's up to the board. If it answers a question the board has, I don't have a problem, but it's up to the board.
Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, before the water even crests the banks, if it's within 0.2 feet, we start monitoring daily at that point. So, and then also there's provisions where we must respond within 12 hours. So before it even comes close to flooding or cresting the bank, we begin monitoring daily before it gets to that point.
I think our concerns are that rain, that overnight rain when,
Yeah, just one that comes that's not what they forecast, which certainly happens.
Yeah, and we have 3 local board members that are in the area. All 5 of the board members' phone numbers will be available. We have 3 local board members in addition to a contractor we'll be hiring that can turn off the pump.
I just think it's important to have some kind of time frame in there or something addressed to where
you know, and I'm looking on page 9 too, it says whether conditions may warrant changes to the monitoring as determined by the lid personnel. So we're going to have to add to that part there.
Nancy says you're talking about unforecasted rain, which is always possible, but as wrong as they usually are, usually we have a pretty good idea that some rain's coming, but it's always possible. That's why working together, I think if we have emergency numbers or an emergency way to get this thing shut off, we can deal with that, so.
So, Madam Chair, I have a question. So, out of compliance has been brought up multiple times. Okay, how many times do we allow it to go out of compliance before we do something?
Well, I think if they're out of compliance, I can't say it's the first half hour, but we'll be issuing a cease and desist or doing something if they say heck with it, we're gonna be out of compliance, which I don't think will happen. They're risking too much.
But you never know,
Never know,
you know?
never. Right. Yeah, the DNR, we'll be all over the DNR, and if they don't, we'll take action to get it. We'll get a judge to shut it off. Again, we're thinking worst case, everybody says the hell with the rules, and hopefully that won't happen, but we'll have a way to shut it off, so.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could, Kurt, we
Yes.
did get a chat that came in, and I either want you to acknowledge it or not have chat, whatever you,
We'll
however
just
you want to
acknowledge
proceed.
that chat came in, but we're not gonna, you know, you can read it, and
Right.
we can do the math too, so that's fine. so. All right, anything else, the board, on conditions? I think you've come up with good, thoughtful conditions. Are there others, any others that before we move on? My thought is, based on what I'm hearing, is if we can get to the point of taking a vote, and I'm not sure it's whether to pass or not pass, with the conditions that we've discussed, then the next step would be to get a recommendation from a viewer as to an outlet fee.
I guess personally, I just as soon wait and have all the conditions listed before we actually take that vote, to make sure everything is listed on there and I know what I'm voting on. Because right now, there's been a lot of conversation, and how does it look in this book?
Yeah, we can put an order together for the board to review that adds all these things.
You know, and at the same time, get someone out to go, what do they call it?
View?
A viewing of the project too. And then do the vote and the viewing at the same time, I guess. Because I would like to see it all put together before I vote on it.
Madam Chair, I have a question, a legal
Yes.
question. Kurt made a statement that if the viewer gives us a recommendation, then we have some concrete evidence to stand on, but if the viewer comes back and I'm assuming it'll be less than 30,000, and we say we still want 30,000, where do we stand in litigation?
I think if you can come up with a reason for it, I'll defend that.
Okay.
The reason I'm asking is, I think this board should set it and not wait for a viewer, because I think everyone's hoping the viewer will come in with less money. And I set this fee, or asked for this fee, because I think it is a strong fee, but yet it is something that protects us. If we go for a little lesser fee, I don't think we're protected too good. When we talk about insurance, you can talk about having insurance all day long. File a claim once and see if you get paid. So we've seen this, guys, with bonding, we've seen it with everything. Try and find someone that's gonna pay you when you do something wrong. When someone does something wrong, it's gonna be a long-term battle before you get the check, and it may be for less than what you really wanted, so.
If you want to decide it all tonight, that's up to you.
Well,
And then
guess I'm
subject
kinda
to, I'll put it,
tired of kicking the can down the road,
Right.
not making a decision. so.
right. So if you want to pass the motion, including the outlet fee, I'll put it into a document for your review, and so, if I'm going to defend it, I'd like you to, I hate to put it, articulate, was it based on use, the 30,000, what's it based on?
Well, I base it on the potential of costs for our staff to be monitoring this, because we're just not gonna sit and pull the shade shut and say, well, we'll wait and see if something's gonna happen. I think that our staff, in particular our ditch inspector, is gonna be, at least for the first year, monitoring this very closely to see how it goes. Now, we're probably, maybe we won't, but the staff and Nancy in particular are gonna receive calls complaining about this and that. She's gonna have to respond. So, the first year's gonna be work the bugs out of this thing. And maybe it's gonna take 2 years to work the bugs out of it. I don't know, but it's gonna cost our staff. And I don't wanna have our taxpayers to pay for this, or the landowners out there, so,
Sure, that's,
And Madam Chair, and let's not forget about our townships.
yeah. So,
Absolutely.
and the theory of an outlet fee is partly Lake Chaminade didn't pay for ditch 41. So part of this is kind of a franchise fee to buy into the system, because they didn't pay for the system. So if you want to make that one of the conditions subject to us putting it into an order for signature, I have no problem with that.
well, it's just purely my recommendation to
Right.
this board, so you guys can certainly discuss it, change it if you want. It's my suggestion only, so,
I mean,
Like I
there is one thought. Let's say it got dropped down to 25,000. Well, by the time we hold another hearing and hire the viewer, we're going to spend a good share of that,
Thank you.
any savings, so.
thank you, that's where I was headed. Also, so.
Yeah.
If I could, one of the conditions already in the order was paying for the staff time, so
Right.
I guess if you don't, I would say first of all, that we shouldn't pay for staff and a fee of $30,000 per year. So that would be the first thing, and then if it seems like the project isn't, over the time it's gonna be reduced, so maybe is there opportunity to reduce the fee every year? And just as an example, maybe it's 30,000 the first year, 20,000 the second year, and 10,000 the third year, because currently, under most scenarios, the lake will be drawn down to ordinary high water in 3 years.
Who's paying Kurt's time?
They are.
We have been.
I mean, one thing you could do is you could say 30,000, and we'll review it annually or review it after 3 years. I mean, because I agree, it shouldn't be 40 years at 30,000.
That's why I want an end date
If it's
to
down
this.
to ordinary high water mark and never goes over that, it shouldn't be an outlet fee from that point on, so.
I think I mentioned that the 3-year review would be a recommendation either to reduce or
I
sunset.
have no problem with that. If you decide we're gonna set it at 30,000 for 3 years and review at the end of 3 years for possible where we are on it, I have no problem with that. I mean,
I would really like to see a sunset on this. I mean, if it's 10 years down the road, whatever, but something to say, this part of it's done and it has to be reviewed at this time, whatever. But I do think we need a sunset on it.
Well, from my perspective, once you grant the outlet, you grant it. As with any ditch petition, you allow an outlet into it. This is, I mean, I think we've already talked about reviewing the operations plan, all of that. It seems like the county has sufficient controls over the project. And in theory, in year 11, there could be a bounce in the lake of a foot, and they might need to turn it on in year 11.
Yeah.
And
I
Then
tend to
would
agree.
be
I
in
hate
favor of
to
keeping with the
sunset
higher
it,
fee.
end it in 5 years, and in the 8th year, they need it, and then they gotta go through this whole process again. But again, if you pass whatever you wanna pass, but, I just wanna,
But I think the whole
we have enough
process would be
protections with
a process.
reviews and operating plans and permits and staff working together. Maybe I'll be wrong, but I'm feeling pretty confident we've got a real handle on this project, so.
Richard, would you be okay with the 30,000 for 3 years and then a review?
Yes, that was my recommendation anyway.
So we've got let's let the chair, we've got a motion
Yes, we do.
and a second, and we've discussed the conditions you'd like to see, including the 30,000 a year, subject to review after 3 years. And we'll put that into an order to make sure it complies with what you think you're voting on. But I'd like to get some indication tonight, bring to some kind of conclusion. If the wording's right,
And Madam Chair, the reviewer, you'd have to schedule them and,
Do we have all the conditions on here? That's my major concern.
Madam Chair, if I may
Yes.
ask, from the auditor treasurer standpoint, going back to number 5 again, would there be a clarification date for our office to know when the first payment starts? Are we getting it a month from now? Is it gonna be January 1st of 2022? What's your
you can
annual
put
date?
put the language in. The outlet fee has to be paid before they operate.
Okay.
And then we can say that each year it'll be paid by, we'll pick a date between Mr. Schock, we'll just pick a date. What date works good for the auditors? Make a difference to you when the check comes in? Okay, just to know,
We
okay.
know when it's coming, when it's,
So we'll word it that the first 30,000 is before the pump operates, because that's how the statute reads. And then the second and third year will be by a certain date, and we'll pick a date.
we'd have to, I mean, in theory, you could go all year without pumping, so we'd have to come up with some mechanism that
Right,
you
right,
wouldn't want to pay it unless you're pumping that
Right.
year.
30,000 a year unless there's a year that it doesn't operate at all.
During pumping.
So that, it could be very confusing,
We'll put some language together between and you'll get to review it.
Can we review that before we actually take the vote? I guess that's what my question was earlier.
That was gonna be my same question. How do
Okay.
we do that?
I'm,
I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying and
maybe
agree
Chris
completely
has some
with it.
suggestions too. I'm not a Robert's Rule of Order of how you generally do things.
Madam Chair, could I maybe suggest and lean on Auditor Treasurer's Office as well? We do have a board meeting coming up next Tuesday. Would it be appropriate and timely to get these put together, and the board could actually table the meeting tonight until Tuesday's
Do it
board
till
meeting?
Tuesday.
And so we have a chance to read over the conditions that we want.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
Madam Chair, you
Yep.
have a motion
Motion
and a second
on the table.
We do.
So you would either need to vote on that now, or you need to have the motioner
Rescinded.
rescind
Okay.
their motion, and the
Okay.
second needs to rescind. That's the action you have to take tonight if you do not wish to vote on it tonight.
You can't recess in the middle of a motion, so.
Could we just verbally go over the conditions? And just
Well, I
make,
thought we have.
I think we pretty well.
and then you could direct Kirk.
It's kinda like labor negotiations, you do the union contract, and then you each review it after you type it up, and then if there's some typos you gotta work out, you do it. So, I'm gonna call the question, Madam Chair.
The question has been called.
Roll call vote, please.
Who'd we start with? Commissioner Kircher?
Yes.
Commissioner Erickson?
Yes.
Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
Commissioner Kneisel?
Yes.
Commissioner Becker?
There are conditions in here that I would like to see yet. I'll vote yes, but I would like to have, be open for review of the conditions.
Again, procedurally, it's not my expertise.
No.
So the motion passed, subject to us putting it into a document for review, or tell me, I'm supposed to have the answers. I don't have the answer to that, to make sure that we're following whatever your procedures
Well,
are.
Madam Chair, that was not part of my motion, but I will amend it to say that we subject to review by the board after it's all done. And I'm sure everybody will vote in approval of that.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rod, you'll make a second.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're continuing it till the 21st, which is next Tuesday, I'm not around, I'm all over the state on other ditch hearings.
Continuing it. It's,
Not,
it's
we
done.
just took the vote.
Okay,
For us
Yes.
to be able to read it and to make sure that all the
like
conditions are met.
something by Tuesday.
So we can look at it and say, hey, that's what we discussed, that's what we approved, let's go.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
we'll,
we can get something
we'll
drafted.
get something drafted. All right, I think that, because we've covered outlet fee, we've covered all the conditions. We'll draft something. Randy's got a thick book now, and so, all right,
Chair, if I may, just to conclude, that you took action tonight, so there'll be no board action on
That's right.
Tuesday. It's just
Review.
for your
It's a
review
review.
that Kurt
Yep.
and the other attorney drop the new conditions,
That's correct.
or added conditions.
Added conditions, we will review the added conditions.
No board action on Tuesday.
okay.
Okay.
Then I don't need to be there, because you're not.
No, you do not.
You can be there if you want.
With that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So move.
Motion by Newman, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Erickson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the meeting is adjourned.